Oh my word. I'm right now, and it just sounds heavy saying it. So I'm glad that I will not have to say anxiety and depression and drugs for just a little while. We'll come back to it. It'll be great. I understand. But for now, it's like a relief for me. So I don't know how many of you heard, but Rich Jones, who was going to be here, had to make a last-minute trip to Pennsylvania to be with his son, who is going through some kind of surgery. I'm not really sure what all is going on there, but he needed to be there. And so God is awesome in how he works and provides. And so we have Jonathan Kittel with us tonight, who is a counselor in Greenville. He spoke at our very first so I'm going to pray for us, hand it over to him, and we'll get going. So let me pray. God, thank you, one, for just who you are, for how glorious and worthy you are to be God. Thank you for
Okay, can you hear me? Is this on? All right, good. Well, good to be with you guys. I am not Rich Jones. He's got some big shoes to fill. He likes to rant and rave, and he's pretty passionate. I like watching him. He's a great guy. And before I agreed, I didn't realize that Duke is playing in the Elite Eight, like right now. Yeah. I might not have agreed to it if I knew that when you asked me to be. No, I'm joking. I'm glad to be here. I'm a Tar Heel fan, and they lost. So I'm not one of those Tar Heel fans that like hates Duke so much. I just want to see him lose every game. But it kind of ruined my March Madness and my bracket. So yeah, Cody called me like 2 days ago and said there was a cancellation. And I usually have something going on Sunday nights, but that canceled. So it all works out. I'm going to put this here, if that's okay, so I can see a little bit. And then I have a sick kid at home, so I got out of that. So this is great. I want to pull up something. I'm not up here texting. I'm not checking the score. I want to read you something. You might have heard this before. It says this is a transcript of a radio conversation of a U.S. naval ship with Canadian authorities off the coast of Newfoundland in October of 1995. The radio conversation released by the Chief of Naval Operations, October 10th, 1995. The Americans say, please divert your course 15 degrees to the north to avoid a collision. Canadians say, we recommend you divert your course 15 degrees to the south to avoid a collision. The Americans get back on the horn and they say, this is the captain of a U.S. Navy ship. I say again, divert your course. Canadians, no. I say again, divert your course. Americans, this is the aircraft carrier USS Lincoln, the second largest ship in the United States Atlantic Fleet. We are accompanied by 3 destroyers, 3 cruisers, and numerous support vessels. I demand that you change your course 15 degrees north. That's 15 degrees north, or countermeasures will be undertaken to ensure the safety of this ship. The Canadian said, this is a lighthouse. Your call. Have you heard that before? I actually don't think it's true, sorry to say. I was doing a little more digging. I heard it somewhere. It might not be exactly true. Why do I start with that? Because we're talking about anxiety. We're talking about depression. What I really want to focus on is probably mostly anxiety. That seems to always run with depression much of the time. Not always, but much of the time. And anxiety is kind of like having a radar system scanning for danger. Imagine you're in like a submarine kind of, cockpit or whatever. You're on a cruise boat. Your radar is scanning for danger. Any enemy vessels, torpedoes, anything like that. We all have this incredibly complex system in our brains, our emotional brain, our limbic system that's constantly doing this. You're doing it right now. You don't even know you're doing it. If somebody walked in who just looked really sketchy, had some kind of weird bag or something, you'd start to feel uncomfortable, right? We have this ability. What anxiety basically is, your fight or flight system has gone awry. Your ability to scan for danger is off. Your brain is scanning and it's picking up that there is danger in your environment when in fact it's not really dangerous. That's essentially what anxiety is from a brain and kind of a biological perspective. I hope that makes sense. We don't need to get rid of the whole system in our brains, right? We need a little bit of anxiety. We just don't call that anxiety, but we need to be able to pick up on danger, to know threats, to discern if it's real or not. The problem is when we get to this point where we're inaccurate, or where we just don't know what's real, what's not real. What I wanted to do, I went through a class at my church actually a couple weeks back, like a series, a 5 or 6 week series on anxiety and depression. And when Cody called me and asked and said, this is what, do you happen to have anything? I thought, yeah, why not? I just kind of finished up on this. So I have a pencil, paper, legal pad up here. This was me and my wife last night just jotting down some bullet points from the class that I remember. So I'm just going to kind of talk casually. And if you've got a question or you want to kind of just hop in, please just interrupt me. I'm pretty low-key and casual. This can be more of a conversation. And I'm going to save some time for questions, okay? What I wanted to do is talk through a couple of things about anxiety, talk about how to deal with it, and then especially talk about you as parents. So a little bit about the nature of it, how do we deal with it, and then specifically some thoughts on you guys as parents. So that's where we're headed. So the first thing is this. If we're going to understand this, and I think respond effectively, we've got to understand, if we zoom back a little bit and just think about human beings, we are holistic. We're multifaceted. You think about like a diamond, has many different facets to it. If you look at it from this angle, you see one thing. You can actually, if it's a good diamond, apparently, not like a jeweler. I don't know why I'm using this metaphor. If you turn it another way, you can actually see different things. The light kind of bounces differently. We are like biological creatures. We're psychological. We're social. We're mental. We're spiritual. We have all of these different aspects about being a human being. And if you want to understand like anxiety and depression, you have to first understand we really are holistic. And all these things kind of come together. So what I wanted to do is talk about the effects of anxiety, depression on each facet, okay? So let's go back to the biology. We already started there with the introduction about your fight or flight system. Have you heard that before, your fight or flight system? You go way back to biology class, right? All of a sudden you look down and there's a snake and you just react. You don't think about it. It just happens. It's really nice that we have that system there. Another way to think about the biology of anxiety, one of the things that we have learned a lot about in the last, 4 to 5 decades is the importance of neurotransmitters. Neurons are just basically the cells in your brain cells. They look a little different than other types of cells, right? But there's lots of different types of cells in your body. And you might go back to biology class. You remember there's that centerpiece, I think it's called the axon, and then it's got these funny little branches off of it, the dendrites. I'm not a doctor, so I don't exactly know if this is true, right? And it sends this electrical signal, this impulse, travels down the arm of the neuron, and then it has to kind of connect to another neuron. There's this space in between these arms. Does anyone know what that's called? Remember? Go away. 10th grade? The synapse, right? You didn't know you were going to go way back. Get a little bio review. A neurotransmitter is like a little ferry boat that takes the electrical signal from one to the other. It kind of allows that connection to happen. We have lots of different kinds of neurotransmitters, acetylcholine and serotonin and norepinephrine and dopamine, all these things that you probably heard a little bit about. We don't really know why, but it seems to be the case that when a person is experiencing significant amounts of anxiety and depression, that your neurotransmitters are off a little bit. That's a pretty simple way to say it, but that's probably the most helpful way to say it. Maybe more specifically, if I added anything to that, it seems to be that a couple of them in particular, norepinephrine, serotonin, get reabsorbed too quickly. And so the signal comes down the neuron, it wants to be able to jump and cross over, but the thing that's normally there to kind of ferry it across is no longer really there. It's been reabsorbed too quickly. And so that connection doesn't really happen. And so in our brain, from a neurochemical kind of standpoint, we get in these rigid kind of habits, and we get used to doing what we're used to doing. A good metaphor is, if you've ever been hiking before, you're going down kind of the main trail, you see these little offshoots to the left or to the right, and you kind of wonder, is that a trail or not? It kind of looks like people have kind of gone that way. Well, then imagine if a huge tree falls kind of right in the middle of the main trail. You come back a few weeks later, and all of a sudden you notice, hey, that offshoot has really kind of expanded, kind of developed a little bit. I can't make that connection, so I kind of make this connection. And my ability to make other connections when I need to goes down. And so this shows up when we kind of turn the diamond and look at another aspect of humanity, this rigidity kind of neurochemically, so to speak. You probably have heard of medicines called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, like Lexapro, Prozac, Zoloft, Paxil, things like that. There's other medicines out there. That's essentially what they're doing. They're kind of helping your body's natural chemicals and neurotransmitters hang out a little longer. It supports them from getting reabsorbed too quickly. I talk to a lot of parents. Listen, I'm not a doctor. I don't make any money from prescribing medicines. I do talk to a lot of parents who are, I think understandably, a little freaked out about taking medicine sometimes, or their kid taking medicine. But most of the time, I find there's a lot of confusion as to what this type of medicine does that really helps anxious kids. And so that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Can we turn the diamond a little bit and talk a little bit now, not just biologically, but psychologically. When this rigidity happens, the connections aren't being made. What's that look like? Well, it looks like people having a lot more negative thoughts, thought processes. The way of their thinking seems to be a lot just skewed. We get in, we make these all the time anyways as humans, but we make even more what we call cognitive distortions. We start assuming the worst more than we normally do. We go into worst case scenario mode a lot more. We kind of get stuck in it, and we can't really get out. Some of you have probably been there, actually. I'm sure you have been there. That's a really frustrating thing. We personalize things. We kind of take things personally that maybe aren't meant to be personal. So our thinking kind of really goes awry. There's a lot of different types of anxiety. It's really impossible to kind of just put this all in one little box. But let me just kind of give you a very quick overview of some different versions of it, so to speak. Probably the easiest is to just think about, and probably the least pertinent for you, think about a phobia. Someone's afraid of bees, or afraid of dogs, or afraid of heights, or something like that. Something very specific. And for some reason, your brain has kind of gotten this little glitchy kind of space and pattern where that thing is no longer just kind of registering as it does for the vast majority of us. When you're around that thing or near that thing or anticipating that thing, your fight or flight system, your radar, it is just going. And so what do? Like if you're afraid of a dog, like you just get away from a dog. I don't know why I looked at you when I said if you're afraid of a dog, get away from a dog. Or if you're afraid of a snake, you kind of just run that way, right? So those are probably the least, problematic for you guys. Folks in here are parents of teenagers. Is this like middle school and high school, or is this high school only? High school. You might have some middle schoolers as well. College. Cool. Okay, great. Worry likes to live in the future. One of the more common types of anxiety is what we just call generalized anxiety, which is basically a way to say we worry about a lot of stuff. Basically, we have what they call, basically when you anticipate something happening, you just start assuming that it's going to be bad and it's probably not going to go well. So you're looking way more as the glass is half empty than half full about a lot of different stuff, right? It could be your test coming up. It could be what your friends are going to say when you go on this trip. It could be how youth group goes when you actually have to show up and spend the first awkward 15 minutes just kind of not doing anything. It could be about a lot of different stuff. You might worry about your family members. You might worry about your kids, right? And it just kind of causes problems. So there's specific stuff. There's generalized kinds of stuff. Anxiety can be the result of something in the past. We don't talk a whole lot about this, probably because as parents who care about your kids, the odds of this happening at this point are probably low. But a lot of kids experience a significant amount of trauma. They have what we call adverse childhood effects. And they go through stuff. And certainly, like, if you're a counselor and you work with adults, a lot of the times you're dealing with people who've experienced a lot of trauma in their life. And there's big T trauma and little t trauma. There's like the classic kind of examples of things that are really traumatic, like, just losing someone in a very horrific kind of accidental way, being like attacked or robbed, sexual assault. There's the classic kind of things. But then there's more like lower grade intensity, but just very frequent types of negative interactions, emotional abuse, manipulation. There's things like that. When we experience that stuff in our past sometimes, now all of a sudden we're living our life, and all of this stuff in the present kind of wakes up this raw spot. And now we're dealing with all of the emotions from all of those things, kind of floods into our present day. Does that make sense? So we often worry about the future. We get stuck in the past. There's this specific stuff. Anxiety can get, I do want to say this, it can get obsessive. It can get kind of anxiety by definition is not logical. We're jumping beyond reason. We're jumping way beyond logic. Obsessive thinking is really not like a logical thing at all. It's kind of like, unless I say the prayer 5 times in the exact right way, with those right words, I don't feel like God hears me or cares for me. In fact, I feel like I have a curse or something like that. Or unless I do this or that in kind of a certain number of way, things are not going to go well. So the obsession is this kind of like thought that you're in danger, that something really bad is going to happen. Either maybe it's to me, maybe it's to a loved one, and it just doesn't make sense. Not logical. And then we engage in some kind of compensatory kind of action or behavior, a compulsion. And again, it doesn't really make sense, but it kind of soothes our anxiety, at least in the short term. OCD it's a very common anxiety disorder. It's very much kind of like a biological thing, glitchy thing going on in your brain. But it can happen after trauma. It can just develop, honestly, middle school years is when we see a lot of that stuff start kind of budding up. Little kids, it's really normal for little kids to kind of be a little OCD here and there, kind of about different stuff, but this stuff can really turn into a big problem. Let me say one other thing and then we'll talk more about the problem. Two other very common types of anxiety. And this is probably maybe where we need to focus a little more time, because this is probably more pertinent to just raising kids in our culture. We might all experience some of this. Social anxiety. Fear, not of snakes or bees or anything like that, but the fear of negative evaluation from other people. That's what that is. Someone's told me once, they're like, Jonathan, let's see if I can remember it. What they think of me, I'll just put it in my words instead of quoting someone talking to me. That was going to be too much. What they think of me is none of my business. What I think they think of me will kill me. What I think for me is really what I need to be aiming towards. Do you hear the difference? What you think of me it's really none of my business. But what I think you think of me is really dangerous to me. And it's dangerous because we can get in this kind of place where, man, again, radar is going off, we're picking up danger, we're picking up all these cues, we're assuming the worst, we're making all of these kind of negative assumptions and statements about ourselves. We don't even know that we're doing it. And the thing about anxiety is, right, if your brain is telling you you're in danger, what do you want to do? You want to fight or flight? We should say it the other way. You want to flee. That's like gear number one. Get out of there. You really only fight if there's no option to get out. If I'm backed in a corner and I got no other way to go, then I'll fight. But I want to just kind of flee, or we might even, sometimes you hear people say freeze a little bit. So think about this if your kid's experiencing social anxiety around peers. Avoidance of that danger means you're going to start isolating more, you're going to withdraw more, disengage from being around others, which of course just gives you all this evidence now to support those thoughts in your head that nobody really likes me because nobody's around. So it turns in on itself and it becomes a bit of a vicious cycle, kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, so to speak. So that's the fear of negative evaluation of other people, social phobia. The other thing that I see a lot is perfectionism, or what we would call the fear of failure. And in our society, we are very obsessed with performance and not just being average. Nobody wants to go to school and just graduate and be an average person. You've got to be the best, right? You've got to be top notch. We want to excel. You look at kind of the verbs and the language we use to market our businesses and our organizations and things like that. We're all about, and I'm not trying to bash that, but it's just in the water that we swim in. We're a culture, we're a people that really care about performance, and that's not all bad. But sometimes what comes with that is the thought of failing. Again, danger. That is not okay. And sometimes, maybe we've, as parents, have given some reasons, not even intentionally, that can kind of reinforce that message. This is the sad, unfortunate reality. You can do great stuff, really good stuff as a parent, with great intentions. And we just live in a broken, fallen world, and it can still kind of be grabbed on, and a kid can take that and it can become part of this formula to kind of reinforce this negativity. It stinks, right? It really does. I'm not here to suggest that there's 3 easy kind of tricks and tools, and if you just do these things, life's going to be great and your kid's going to be awesome. I'd make a lot more money if I had that figured out. So there's that kind of fear of failure stuff. And all of these things, let me kind of just pause and zoom back again, whether it's fear of failure or social stuff or just general like worrying all the time or specific things or obsessive stuff, all of it can kind of exist in like mild versions, moderate versions, or severe versions. The real question is, how much interference in your life is happening? Like that's how you kind of know, is this a real problem or is this just kind of normal teenage angst and stress? You know, how much of your life and your family's lives is really being compromised or interfered with? So think about their friendships. Think about their, ability to engage in school or activities like that. Think about the stress that's happening in the home around this. I'm not going to share examples. I have a lot of examples. Actually, I will share one. There's this little kid years ago who had this, he had a lot of anxiety. I mean, little guy. And he was like really afraid of cows, some weird like farm animals. I don't know how, right? I don't know why, and I don't know how. And we were asking the parents, well, how much interference is kind of like happening in the home? Like, they're like, oh, like none at all. And we're like, oh, okay. And they start telling us about their day. And they kept talking about like having to leave extremely early to go to school and referring to, I forget what it was, the commute. They kept calling it like it had this big like name, every morning. And we're like, well, what are you talking about? They're like, well, we're not allowed to go down this road and we can't go down that road. We have to end up taking like a 20-minute longer route to avoid, they lived out in the country, like the farms and the stuff like that. So I'm like, it kind of seems like it's interfering. But they were used to it. And so, when you're afraid of a dog, if you just stay away from dogs, your stress level's low. So there's the interference that's happening in your life, but then there's like, how intense is the distress when you're actually near the object? And sometimes we've gotten into these patterns where we just avoid everything. So you never feel the distress level kind of go up high. So little Johnny couldn't see a cow. Okay, let me do this. I want to get back. Okay. Can I pause? Are there any questions about the different kind of versions or flavors? What I want to do now is begin in a minute or so to talk about, so what do we do? But any questions about anything? Okay. So what do we do? One of the things that's been helpful for me, I think it was an old supervisor who taught this to me, is to think about the anxiety formula. I think I shared this when I was here, whenever that was, last year maybe. The anxiety formula. So again, go back to like math class. But this time, don't worry, it's not high school biology, like second grade level math, okay? You're doing just basic addition and subtraction. We're going to stack the numbers on top of each other, draw the line, get the answer, right? So you're going to add up all your stress in your life, and then you're going to subtract your ability to cope, and that's going to leave you with your anxiety level. And you might even say your anxiety and depression level, kind of your general emotional kind of angst. All your stress in your life, minus your ability to cope and to deal with that effectively, leaves you with your anxiety, your stress level. Does that make sense? Simple enough? Now again, when I say stress, it's very broad, very broad. In fact, I'll just emphasize it again. Holistic stress. Social stress, obviously that's a big one when we think about teenagers. Biological stress, I know I'm stretching that word a little bit, but there is, biological kind of predispositions to develop anxiety disorders, depression, mental illness is a real thing. So there's biological vulnerabilities that we kind of inherit or acquire through our life. There's psychological kind of stressors, again, the context, the environment you grow up in. There's, unfortunately, right, families are really broken, and that's just not something for people way out there, like that's in our house as well. The relational systems kind of that get going. There's spiritual brokenness. There's just a lot of different kinds of stress, right? And then we subtract our ability to cope, and we're left with our anxiety level. So what do we want to do? I mean, I'm assuming everyone here is interested in that anxiety level going down. I don't have to talk you into that, right? That's what we're after, kind of a shared goal. Well, there's two ways to do it. Math people, you know, what do you need to do to those numbers? If we could make that top number smaller, right? 10 minus 2 is 8. But if it's 4 minus 2, that's 2. So if we can make that top number smaller or that bottom number bigger, we're going to do some damage against anxiety. And so that's really what we're always kind of aiming for. And that's what I would offer to you guys to be aiming for. I really think that it's a parent's role to limit the stress as much as you can. Well, I shouldn't say as much as you can. I just think it's your job to be checked in and tuned in and to be limiting the stress on your kids if it's too much, if it's stuff that they can't handle. Obviously, driving 40 minutes to take your elementary school kid and never seeing a cow, that might be a little bit of an overshoot, right? They might be like, well, hey, I'm just limiting their stress. We might say, seems like you're enabling a problem. But I really do think that's the case. Being the authority as a parent is, I think, again, gear number one, the first key ingredient of being a good parent, and I would even argue a godly parent. The other gear, the other key ingredient, I often say, is warmth. And if you put those two together, you've got some good stuff there. To be a warmth authority, or an authority who cares and has a relationship with somebody. Problems go in lots of different directions where you just have one without the other. You know, I'm the authority, but there's no warmth here, and there's no real connection. Or we got the connection, and we're warm, and we're friends, but there's no authority. I've never thought about this, but when I was thinking about it yesterday, I'm like, but you know, if I had to pick, I think I'd take authority and no warmth. I do. And maybe that's just like working with teenagers, and you know, obviously it's just all going to depend on your kid and your specific thing, right? And don't just aim for one, right? Aim for both. But there's something about, I guess when I start thinking about the things that kids deal with these days and the danger that's out there, and I'm not trying to like do fear tactics here. I do think the foolishness inside your kid is more dangerous than all the stuff outside your kid. That's actually not super popular these days. But we tend to think more about the external dangers out there and drugs and alcohol, and we should. And Rich Jones came here and I'm sure just like convinced you of it. And it's very real. And that's actually the reason why I think an authority who's going to like get in there and not just let your kid do whatever the heck they want, and not be afraid of upsetting your child and kind of like damaging a little bit of the emotional connection, that's a really, really good thing, and that's a really needed thing. And if you're at that place with your kid, that is not evidence or a sign that you're doing something wrong. There's going to be months, years, weeks where there's just a lot of like friction. We don't really like authority, right? Do you? Do you like authority? I don't really like authority all the time. So, yeah.
When you have one parent that's kind of one and one parent that's kind of the other, is that
One, yeah. Good, yeah, no way, right? Asking for a friend here. Good cop, bad cop kind of thing. Yeah, sure. I would actually say,
really the same person every time, but
I mean, yeah. And I would say, probably not can you, but you probably will. There's something about like the dynamics in a family where if I think my wife has been a little too harsh with my kids, I just kind of start showing up with a little more like, hey, come on up here, like a little more graciousness, or just doing something, try to stay united. I'm not trying to like, throw her under the bus in front of our kids or anything. And vice versa. There's that natural bent to balance things out, I think. So actually, we see it all the time. One parent is maybe a little more just tough. They come in, they're more of the enforcer. Pick your parenting book out there. They're the drill sergeant, right? And then like the other parent is more of like the helicopter. I'm going to swoop in there and kind of protect, or more relational. And it's not always dad and mom that way. It's not always completely consistent and congruent within a parent. It could be like, with school and with friends, I'm a little more harsh. But with like picking up around the house and chores and all that kind of stuff, I'm like, whatever, you only got one life to live here. Let's, So, but yeah, we need one another as parents. And obviously not every parent is blessed to have, there's a lot of single parents, divorced, or, there's just like a bad kind of connection. I'm going to talk about marriage in a second. But we're not perfect. And we're limited, and we bring some stuff to the table, and then we bring some challenges, right? So yeah, balance it out. That's fine. I do think probably it's good to move towards being on the same page, generally. Someone told me that you can get in a lot of trouble just stating a lot of general kind of stuff, but generally. So we've talked a little bit about, the holistic aspect of humans, anxiety, depression. We've talked about the anxiety formula and the role of parents a little more. We're kind of in that zone already. Can I say a little bit more about, I guess, how to, some big hot topic, this is called hot topic, is that what this is? Yeah. Things would be, when you talk about limiting stress, what do you guys think of? What are the specific kind of issues that come up when you think about, okay, how much stress or how much should I let my kid deal with on their own? How much should I still kind of be involved with? What are the specific areas of life that kind of come to mind? I'm curious if we're on the same page. How many AP courses they take? Uh-huh. What else? Cell phones, social media. Yeah. Friend groups. Yeah, who to hang with, right? Right. Right. Say more about that.
I just think, as a society, I think that we just kind of I'm involved in it too, but it's just craziness. You got to play year round.
Oh, I see.
You can't play. When I was growing up, everybody played everything.
We follow, if you follow the normal just kind of flow, you're going to end up on travel team and all of this stuff. And you're like, maybe we should think through that a little bit. Sure. So hobbies, interests, friends.
I do want to say this. When I took my youngest daughter to a well-child checkup last week, her pediatrician did ask specifically, what are you doing and do you enjoy what you're doing? And I thought that was a great question because, and I at one point I thought about leaving. Maybe she would say more, but
Right.
I thought that was important. I guess you have to enjoy what you're doing. You're spending a lot of time doing it.
Right. That's a good question. Those were the things I think I thought of social media. I think the other big thing, I guess, has probably been covered is experimenting with, drugs or vaping or Juuls or dab pens or smoking pot or whatever, right? Have you had the conversation yet? Your kids think smoking pot is okay, right? Deep down in there, they do. And you might too as well. Who knows? I joke, right? But it's, I tell you, this is one of those, if I had $1 for every time I had a conversation from a kid who's just completely certain that he's right, that it's not addictive, right? It's not an addictive thing. I'd have a lot of money.
I think there's a lot of confusion for people our age.
Super
People
young.
our age, there was everything was illegal. It seemed like when we were there.
Right.
And now society's making everything kind of cool and legal, and it's okay
Yeah.
to do. So we're coming from a perspective of growing up that it was illegal, and our kids are growing up in a perspective that, like you said, it's not addictive, it's not, it's okay, it's making a big deal out of it than it needs to be.
Right.
It's kind of acceptable.
Yeah, so different ballpark, right? Can I speak to that? I mean, I don't really have anything else other than be a good parent. That's what I was going to end with. That was my conclusion. Just going to land there. Be healthy. Again, so sorry about that. Okay. I usually, it often comes up, the legality of a substance is often one of the first things that's brought up. I think we as parents too, you want your kid to respect the law and authority and care about that. And when you hear them kind of just bypassing that, I think it understandably kind of pulls on your heart, kind of like a punch to the gut, and you're like, oh my gosh, like they don't care about the law or whatever. But the reality is, you can have a lot of problems with a lot of things that are legal. Alcohol is legal for everyone over 21. I have a big problem with alcohol. So I like to talk not so much about the legality, because it is changing and I can't control anything about whether it's legal or not, and to talk more about what does it mean basically in your life. One of the things that Rich often says, today's pot is not the pot of our day, or however he says it. When I always laugh when he says it. It really is different, and it's changed a little bit. It's more potent. Of course, a lot of kids smoking pot, again, I'm not trying to shock you, but if your kid is smoking pot, it's probably the case that they're not just like burning the grass. They're using what they call now a dab pen, which is basically kind of like a vape or an e-cigarette, and you can get on the black market, you can get like cartridges with THC, like marijuana, in it, and you can smoke it in your bedroom, and you have no idea. So you think about the access to something like that. And so the kids will be like, well, it's not addictive, right? Marijuana is not addictive. I'm like, what do you mean by that? Well, like, just Google it. And I'm like, is that our standard? Is that where we're at? I think it is, though. Ask Alexa. My 2.5-year-old asked Alexa a question today. I was like, oh my gosh. And I'll say, yeah, like if you do some heroin once and you smoke pot once, what are the odds that the pleasure center of your brain is going to get hijacked? Yes, heroin, much more likely, is probably going to do more damage at one time than just smoking pot. Not probably, very much the case, right? Did Rich talk about the pleasure center of the brain and dopamine and all of this stuff? Like, anything can begin to take that over. But some things can really do damage on it and do some just horrific kind of damage. Heroin, things like that, opioids. But you just think about like TV. I don't know if you've ever been in a place where it's like, oh my gosh, like if I can't sit down and watch my show, like I just feel kind of off and I can't come down and I can't just relax and do what I do or whatever. So the accessibility of pot, I think, is one of the things that makes it so dangerous. I hear it all the time. I don't know why I'm talking so much about pot. I'm going to get back to anxiety and depression. But this is just a guess. I would say probably 80%, a little more conservative, 80% of the kids that I work with who are smoking pot or doing it some tell me one of the best things about it is that it helps them, it takes their stress down. And so the more you just do something and the more that becomes like your go-to way of stress management, you're just not learning any other skills for stress management. And guess what? Life is stressful. So it becomes our go-to thing. And then you're just, in this kind of vortex of, I can't really go out into the world and do my life unless I'm high. But of course, when I'm high, my motivation is gone, my energy is gone. And so like my performance, vicious cycle. So it's very dangerous. I wouldn't focus too much on the legality of it. But totally that should be something I think that you got to be involved with. I think social media, can I talk a little bit about that? And then feel free to fire questions. Again, sorry to be general, but I think it's one of these things, like the younger they are, obviously the more involved you're going to be. Y'all probably get that. And then as they grow older, if they are showing they can be responsible, you give them like more freedom. But I'm a big fan of, until your kids leave for high school, you've got access to their phones. I'm actually a big fan. This is just, please don't, listen, if you're not doing this, don't feel like guilty or whatever. I'm just giving you my, what I see kind of tends to work the best. Have access to their phone. Have the phone not be available 24 hours a day. Alarm clocks still exist, right? You've heard this one, right? Well, I gotta have my phone to wake up, right? It's like $8 at Walmart, right? You can buy an alarm clock. I think, and again, just anecdotal stuff here, but I think that's a battle worth fighting. You ever watched a little kid who's like around a TV and they're not really kind of watching the TV, maybe you're watching the game or something like that, and little toddlers down there playing, and then the commercials come on? You see what happens? Like they're just like, it sucks them in, right? There's all this like lights and movement and music, and it's different and it's engaged. Totally just like, bam. And you know what happens when your brain gets stimulated? You calm down. That's why kids who have like ADHD, which is a real thing, and another kind of issue with teenagers, we didn't talk a lot about that. That's why stimulant medication can help if it's a real issue, because your brain's understimulated. But anyways, when your brain gets stimulated by this stuff, it soothes you, calms you down, feels real good. It's like you kind of get a hit, so to speak. And so that same pleasure center of the brain that gets all hijacked with drugs, with alcohol, it just seems to be the case more and more that it's affected and it's impacted by the amount of screen time, and just like, if somebody likes your post, whoa, right? Like, hey, they commented on that. Kind of does something for you. So anything that's just so powerful and potent, I think, has got to be managed. I know this is general. Please feel free, if you've got other questions or thoughts on social media, you can share. What are you guys doing? Do you mind if I ask? Can you, anyone risk being vulnerable? Like, how does it go in your world, Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm going to friend him or whatever, but then I've heard a lot about Instagram, like the fake Instagram. I mean, how do you, I'm just clueless. I don't know.
I know. I see that. I don't know. I'll be honest. I'm not like a guy. I'm not one of those guys that's like on the forefront of technology.
Yeah.
I usually get something like, I'm like the last 7% to adopt. But I hear all the time, kids, a lot of times they have like accounts that you don't know about. Of course, a lot of the apps, things that are up there, they then disappear. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, for social media, our kids don't really recognize the passwords, so they can't download an app without getting permission from us.
That's a great idea.
They also don't know their passwords to their social media apps, so if we need to, we can lock them out and make them have access to it. So that's something that we can do.
Yeah.
We actually have a sophomore that we found out was not using it responsibly. So, especially with Snapchat, you can't track that.
Right.
We just took it away.
Right.
She hasn't had it for a year. And she seems to be okay with it. At first, it was like, oh my gosh, you're going to take it away. And I'm like,
Yeah.
sorry. And I told her younger sister, give me one reason and yours will be gone too, because I don't like it. I just don't like the stuff that you can't track.
Right. Let me say this. Let me give one for the kids here. I do work with a lot of teenagers. I will, like, this is hard. This is, if I had just like 3 wishes, something I could change probably about our world, this might be one of it. Just this, the whole social media technology, like, can we just go back to the dial-up phone type of thing?
Because there's ways to hide stuff even within that app. I didn't realize that there was, within Snapchat, there's like a
Right.
secret Snapchat that they can set up with their own password that we didn't know about. And then I found out about it, and I took the phone and I said, give me the password, and she turned white.
Right.
And we found pictures within that Snapchat that we had no idea that they were hiding in
Right,
there.
right.
And I'm like, nope.
The thing that stinks is, Cody, you could probably speak to this too, but when kids are like, it's like the way that people communicate, there's a lot of truth to that. And they feel it when they don't have certain things. And so I just want you to know the battle that you're getting into, and you got to kind of think about that. I know some people who really tried. I mean, it has taken a lot of effort, and it's not like knocking it out of the park. But they've said, okay, we'll do it, we'll do it, we'll do it. Who else is in? Some families kind of at a same church or friends, like, let's all try to do this together, maybe for a year, and check back in, like not go at it alone. Obviously that's really hard and complicated, right? But that whole like feeling like I'm gonna be left out, you go back to the social anxiety thing, and it's a real thing. So it's not easy. You gotta, if you're gonna do it, just be prepared to kind of wade into those waters.
And that is 2007 when we had that. I think that it's addictive as drugs. How social media technologies develop, it's made it the same, dopamine releases or whatever, your brain likes or whatever. I think nobody knew it. In 2007, everybody's like, hey, this is great. I can see my kids wherever they are. It allows me to enhance level, which you think is safety, but it's really safe. And I agree with what Jonathan's saying. I think there's a fair amount of this. Hey, if you can band together with some people and you've got a 10 or 11-year-old now and stay that off 3 or 4 years, the benefits far outweigh the negatives.
Right.
I wish I'd have known it 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's like nobody smokes cigarettes. Well, not nobody. Probably most of y'all don't smoke cigarettes, right?
Yeah.
Long time ago, we all would have, right? It's just we didn't know what we didn't know. And
We've never been faced with like an inappropriate adult trying to contact our children, but it does open them up to have contacts with kids at other schools and everywhere that are not making good choices. And then they get like sucked in, and next thing
Right.
you know, they're hanging out with kids that you don't even know who they are or where they are, and
So,
yeah, and that's a big thing too.
it completely opens them up. It's like, you know, when we were growing up, you knew everybody in your school and maybe the next county
I know.
over.
so we have a son who is a sophomore and he's trying to play at the next level in college. And we went to this big thing in January, and they had a parent, we had the recruiting people there and us telling us what to do. And they are telling us to help them get recruited, you've got to get on social media. You have to make, and he's got to make his account public so that the colleges and the recruiting
Right.
assistants can come and follow him.
Right.
Now it's a and he's got to like all these coaches and follow. It's a double-edged sword because when it gets public now, that means they are watching you, and there are people there who are watching to see what you're doing. If you make an offside comment,
Yeah,
or if you're in a
from a
picture.
recruiting standpoint, it's a win-win. We
It
get to
is.
know you, and we get to
Well, there
figure
were
out if we don't like
some
you.
kids who got their scholarships or their opportunity to play somewhere taken away
Right.
because they made an off-color joke, and the recruiting assistant saw it and said, "Nope, we're rescinding our offer to you."
I feel
so
like
now you know, like everybody's watching you, and they're.
that's not it, but you know,
But not
College
that-
are trying to get jobs.
Well, that's true,
Everybody-
yeah.
they're interviewing,
But they don't realize that, and it's private. Now it's public. for everybody.
they might be in a better position though, knowing, hey, you got a bunch of people watching you.
Yeah.
And it could
That might not be a bad thing.
Yeah, but
Might
I
not
think
be a
it's so
bad thing.
funny that we're like, hold off on the social media, and then the recruiting people are like, get on it, and you've got to make it public for everybody.
Well,
But
Yeah.
then we're watching you, Big
We
Brother
as
is
a
watching.
nation, let's just set up a LinkedIn account and, you know, volunteer, do all that kind of stuff on the LinkedIn and then keep the other stuff more private. But I mean, they can still access it.
totally. And it gets into like, you know, there's endless options and endless opportunities when you're seeking after some kind of goal. I'm a big fan of recognizing our limits, recognizing there's a lot of stuff we can't control. And again, if I'm talking about anxiety too, I'm a recovering perfectionist, kind of fear of failure kind of guy. Me showing up and giving a talk with this is actually a lot of progress, right? If I'm going to do something, I really want to do it well. And the reality is there's just only so much we can do. And I kind of think, you know, if a kid's going to like make it to the majors, probably his game will speak for itself at some point. You know, I know Zion Williamson though. Sorry, I'm thinking about Duke again. He's social media kind of phenom. Don't tell me the score, you know.
Jonathan,
Yep.
with a lot of us having older teenagers that are going out to college or already in college, at what point do you think that parents should back out a little bit from the helicopter or the controlling everything and giving them no limit to make mistakes with it?
Yeah, again, I think it's a gradual thing kind of all along the way probably, which I know doesn't answer the specific question. When you're not paying for anything, when you're not giving them any financial kind of support, I think if you are giving them financial support for anything, then you should totally stay in there. You know, nobody is entitled to college tuition or entitled to have car insurance paid or entitled to just, it's not the way they think they are. So I would say absolutely, if you're like investing time and energy still and resources, then yeah, I think you kind of have the right to be checking in a little bit. But obviously, like if it's a, say you got a 22, 23-year-old who's like went off to grad school and y'all just, you're kind of giving them some money because you had it and you want to bless them that way, that's different than if they're like 18 and they're a freshman going off to Clemson.
But you're still going to call your 22-year-old when they're posting on Google and say, you have a job interview tomorrow, please take it. Well, you have a motion room. I mean, you know, sometimes you just can't help it. You just have to stay involved
Can't, right?
in that.
Right.
I mean, because they're just, they're like 25, they're not, we just don't find.
It's like a fine line. It's a bit of a tightrope. You know, when I said recognizing our limits, recognizing our kids' limits, we got to recognize our limits too as parents. There's only so much calls and I've got daughters, I don't think about that, you know, that you can do. The thing is too, you know, this isn't all on parenting, but consequences, natural consequences are great teachers. And so you're 22 and you don't get a job, you know, everybody knows here your life is not over, right? It might not be a bad thing. Maybe you'll finally realize it once you know, they show you. Do you normally do this on the weekends? Like, maybe, so let them experience the natural, I kind of say like, is the natural consequence something they can handle or not? Is it going to like really just kind of disrupt their world and cause all of this like additional suffering? Are they going to spiral? That kind of thing. You know, when I work with parents whose kids have like a learning challenge or ADHD or something, they're like, well, you know, like, you know, they just got to fail. You know, kids got to fail to learn. I'm like, no. Like, that's just not how it, like, natural consequences, like, we can throw that out there, but that can get, you know, I feed my kids, I do all this stuff for them because, like, I know they can't do it for themselves. So that's really the thing you're trying to figure out. Can they handle this? Can they, is this kind of appropriate for them? Are they going to be able to recover or not? Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So to me, it's more like how them saying
Yeah, I think, you're trying to, I like what the love and logic people say, that you're trying to become a consultant parent. You're trying to move, you're still in charge, you still have authority, but day-to-day wise, you kind of get to that point where you're kind of a consultant. You got opinions, you got ideas, but you're also like when a consultant gives those opinions and ideas and suggestions, they're recognizing the autonomy that the other person has and the ability to make a choice. They're the ones that are going to have to live with it. Like their business, it's their life. So if you're doing some of that with your kids, I think that's great. I would say just don't let go of getting a pulse and staying connected and monitoring. If they're in high school, I would still say you should be kind of checking in and monitoring a little bit. If not that, if you only got so much time, still setting some limits and some boundaries just where like it can't be. Some sacred spaces or times or whatever, like, pick something. Don't try to make everything, but maybe it's when we sit down for dinner. You just can't bring a phone to the table. Or maybe it's in the car. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But for y'all, maybe you're like, no, please, get on your phone in the car. So I would say do that still. Just because you just never know. I've heard way too many kind of crazy things. Oh my gosh, we thought everything was fine, and then we found, this or that. I hope that helps. Yeah. Please. Yeah. How to build coping skills or how to take away stress? Yeah. I guess it depends on, again, how severe is it right now or not. When you think about, that old book, you can get it for free online. It's like written in the 20s for salesmen, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Yeah. The 20s, I think, right? It's crazy. It was a long time ago. Dale Carnegie? Maybe not the 20s. I think, look it up, it's old. Yeah, I know. I actually use that book. I use that book for kids and teens to learn some like basic social skills. So this is kind of how anxiety is treated. If we get back to like anxiety, right? Something is like giving me this danger. I want to get away from it. What I need to do is I do need to build up some tools, some coping strategies or whatever, but not for no reason. All for the purpose of facing it, moving towards it. You never get over the fear unless you move towards it. So, having a conversation about what's going on or whatever. You might even like give them some tips of like, I pick on the youth pastor, like, it's the unstructured times where people are just milling around, where like, that's when like the awkward kids feel the worst. It's like, who do I talk to? What do I say? That kind of stuff. So I guess I'm not really answering your specific thing other than to say like, some education on maybe this is kind of what you can say or this is what you can be talking about. This is how you have a conversation. The other thing is to get them to, again, think what they think of you is really different than what you think they think of you. And when they can be, as you're getting into the high school years, kids are now developing the ability to do kind of abstract reasoning. They can think about their thinking as they're getting older. So that's kind of cool. And you can kind of help them see that. And then just some basic relaxation techniques. I mean, about every client that I work with, I teach them diaphragmatic breathing. Breathe from your belly. How to like relax yourself. slow it down. It just notches down your anxiety level a couple notches. So beyond that, I don't know. Like, it would have to depend on what's specifically going on.
About just basic having conversations with kids versus texting. I think that is a huge problem, that kids don't even know how to converse with each other.
I know.
And, there's been times that I would make my children, I have made them pick the phone and call.
I'm sure they love it.
They hate that, they don't like to know.
I know, right?
They do. I mean, I've watched them before, Saturday sporting event. I'm like, who are you texting? And they're texting somebody sitting 2 seats over versus leaning over them.
I know.
So, my kids to call.
Right.
Well, I was gonna say this too, I did not know this until Thursday night, when I went over to Clemson, but, I mean, I had this senior in college, and I had no idea until he's told me that the Snapchat is really the way that some of these kids are developing relationships. So if you're spending a good bit of time, and anybody can get on within their friend group and say, I mean, so-and-so has, sent 150 Snapchats in the last hour. And it's because that's how they're trying to like form this relationship. I'd never heard of such. I looked at it and I said, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
People do it all the time. And
Yeah.
they ask people out that way too.
Oh yeah, totally. And here's the thing, like, you're not, as much as we would like to change the world, you're not going to change the world. But you've got to pick your battles, and you got to make, just figure out what you can do. Can I say this, and then I'll be done. If you have more questions, you can come talk to me. Or if we want to keep going, we have a few more minutes, we can. But let me just end with this. Anxiety, it's a real thing. Depression's a real thing. I didn't even go into the specific kind of symptoms. When the interference kind of gets going, when it's really bad, you will, let me just quickly say, you'll see like physical symptoms of the body, like sleep kind of goes away, your appetite falls, muscle tension, ache, soreness, like physical complaints. When they're little, I mean, pediatricians, I'll get their notes, and it's like headaches, abdominal pain, headaches, abdominal pain. Like that's kind of what's happening. I think one of the most important things really is, as you're in the trenches, you can't give away what you don't first possess. You can't teach something that you kind of don't live yourself. Anxiety and depression are real. Mental illness is real. You might have like a disorder that you're like working with and struggling with your whole life, and that's fine. But I really do want you to know, like, big picture, zoom way out from the nitty-gritty details. Striving to actually keep your own anxiety level and like work with your own mood, I think is the most important thing you really can be doing. I really mean that. It's contagious. I mean, not like a cold and flu, but worry kind of begets worry, and stress and anxiety in the home and in your relationships. Like, that has a huge, huge impact on kids. So be involved, be a great parent, keep coming to these things and ask all these specific questions. But don't forget, right, you've got to also just live your life. And that, 30 years from now, that's going to be the most important thing. Okay, why don't we just end here? I'll be up here. Is that cool? Now I know your time to end. Can I pray for you guys? Is that okay? I'd love to pray for y'all. I know there's a lot of kids represented here, a lot of families. Really